You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.
Welcome to episode 44 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can. Whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game up to the next level, I am Sara.
I'm Rob, and yeah, I whistle the intro and sway my head too. It happens.
I dig that music. I really do.
I'm glad I found it.
I know.
Like I'm happy that it got created because I literally stumbled across that.
Uh-huh.
Like just going through freemusicarchive.org. Go visit it sometime. There's some amazing stuff in there and some crazy stuff in there.
There really is. And I remember you shot me like 10 different tracks or something like that. And I remember like listening to this one, I'm just like, oh yeah.
How can we not?
Oh god, I want to put this one into my game soundtrack.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. No, it was a nice find. And some of the other tracks have been really fantastic finds. I mean, we have some that we haven't even used yet.
Yeah.
That we've been thinking about using that are really introspective and they're fun. So I'm looking forward to starting to use those for other pieces that we have.
Some of those ones from one of our one-off episodes too.
Yep.
We just want to come back to. So yeah.
So.
All right. So this week,
yes,
I know we've kind of strayed around a little bit.
We have. We're gonna have to narrow our focus.
We're gonna have to narrow our focus a little bit.
That's right.
I think that's
really
what our
sight
topic
it in,
is.
if you will, with laser precision.
Well, I don't know about that.
We're not.
I'm
totally not.
Only Imperial Stormtroopers are this precise, buddy.
Oh, geez. Are they accurate? I think they're accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So today we are talking about scope. And what we're talking about when we define scope is anything that sets a limit to the story from the storyteller's perspective. And this could not only just be location, but this could also be like what books you're going to use. Like if you're familiar with Palladium or even D&D, there are a plethora of resources out there. And so you might limit it to say, hey, I only want to use the base book and maybe one other resource guide. And that's it. That's all I want to use. I know for some of us who had second edition, I think there was like 40 books. You know, you had like complete paladin and complete ranger and you had ridiculous numbers of books that were out there.
On that note, okay, so vocab time.
Okay.
I totally because I never use this word for them.
Sure.
But my Sean, my boyfriend, we were talking the other day and he was like, they had tons of splats. And I was like, splats? And he's like, yeah, supplemental source books, splats. And I'm like, dude, I haven't heard them called splats in probably 20 years.
God.
Yeah.
I barely recall the word being used.
Right. I don't even know what the origins of it are.
Supplements, I remember. Okay, we're going to ask this. Anybody can remember the origins of splats, please go ahead. I know I'm expecting Draven or Overwatch to hit me here with when splats was a thing and who brought it up.
Right.
Usenet. Thank you. That was pretty much it. Yeah,
I used to hear it a lot in reference to like Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah,
you know they'd have a clan book for every single clan, Vampire clan. So you would call those splats. But that's I think where the last time I heard it referenced like that.
I always remember them as supplemental resource books or supplements.
Yeah,
or world guides
was
another way that it often was put because like you'd get those for Palladium, you'd get the world guides. Whether it was like Triax Industries world book or source book. That was always the term. So it was always the source book, world book, the guide, the complete guide or whatever. Yeah. Now we don't get those so much anymore. So much as there's definitely supplements. We see it in 5th edition all the time. You've got the what was the one that just came out that had that has all of the artificer stuff in it, the new robotic stuff.
Oh, was that Eberron now?
I think it's
Explorer's Guide to Eberron or something like that.
It might be. So
I don't
there's
really
just
remember.
too much.
There's Unearthed Arcana I know is doing a lot of but the UA is all the playtest stuff. So.
Yeah. So anyways, we're talking about that limitation. Books, world, classes, things like that. And different games do it different ways. Some games kind of have inherent scoping already in them, but it doesn't mean you can't narrow it down even further than that by talking about even like the genre or I'm going to say it, power sets. So, but we'll get into that. But you had a really good description of a world that a storytelling style that is limited and one that is open, and what those two kind of things. And I thought it was a really good way of doing it.
Right. So we were discussing the whole concept of scope in story. And what came to mind immediately was the comparison between, for those of you people who may be nerds out there, is Star Trek The Next Generation versus Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
Now, I know I'm referencing some pretty old shows there, but I think those of you who are in the know would know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
One of them is every single episode they are cruising through space in some backwoods, section of wherever.
Yeah.
Who knows? They're all over the place.
Yeah.
And they encounter things as they're gallivanting around the universe.
And it's random. You never quite know.
Random.
Sometimes it's the same race, but sometimes it's a completely different area or timeline or whatever.
Sometimes the complication is something that's happening to the crew. Sometimes the complication is some weird alien race you've never seen before. They get involved in their problems and then you never see them again.
Or if you do, it is much later and the reference is light enough that you didn't have to see the previous thing to get the new thing.
Exactly. It's all very episodic. Yeah. Now, compare that to Deep Space Nine.
Right.
Okay, so
Space station.
Our scope has been narrowed to a space station.
Effectively a city, if you will.
Exactly. Single space station. We've got the same characters every week. We've got the same alien races getting involved in things all the time. The Bajorans, the Cardassians, a little bit later, a few seasons later, we got the Dominion coming in.
Yeah.
But that's it. You get to see a lot of them because they're always around, because the space station doesn't go anywhere. It's always orbiting Bajor.
Yeah.
The Cardassians are always right there.
Yeah.
So that's a great example of limiting your scope down.
Yes, Sam. Yes.
Yes, the Kardashians. Yes.
The Kardashians.
They're always there. Why won't they leave us alone?
So if you're not so familiar with that, let's talk about it on a different level.
Sure.
Something like Stranger Things.
Sure.
There's a lot of scope that goes on in that story as far as what they do, but it's all happening in one area.
One little town in Indiana.
With very simple people involved. Like your NPC list is pretty minor.
Yeah.
And all your other stuff, it's a really short list of stuff. Whereas on the other hand, you have Game of Thrones, where every week, sometimes every 5 minutes, you're in a different part of the world, talking to different people about different
continents,
shit, which constantly are getting randomly things thrown at them, sometimes that don't even follow the book stories. So the lore is just massive and grows every single minute of every single episode.
Yeah.
And unless you're quote unquote in the know and a super nerd about it, you can get lost. You can't just jump into an episode and enjoy it.
Right.
You had to be there from season beginning to be able to get any parts of that. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a different layer of scope. Another one you gave was Thor Ragnarok versus Endgame.
Yeah.
It's one storyline. It's scoped out to just Thor.
Yep. It's just Thor. It's just Asgard. Okay, there's some other stuff going on in Ragnarok. Maybe that's a bad example. But we're talking about one superhero on one planet doing one thing, following one storyline, but following it in depth.
Yep.
And everything is super important, but it's a small cast telling one very deep story versus Endgame, which is a lot of characters.
Well, and
doing
it's not only
a lot
that.
Of things.
You can tell in Thor Ragnarok, they said, we're keeping these people together. The story is going to go beginning to end together.
It was almost a theme of packaging it.
Correct. And the only time we ever really got to see the other stuff was when we were watching the antagonist, when we got scenes from the antagonist of what was going on the other side of the coin, and honestly, if you just cut out the hella scenes that they weren't in, but you kept in, the parts where either the players are directly involved, it pretty much was a straight D&D small scope.
Yeah.
It walked right along the path lines to do that. Whereas with Endgame, you were everywhere. It was, I'm going to say it, like you had 2 or 3 DMs running the same game, which apparently can work. It does happen. But they were all over the universe, the multiverse, the timeline.
Yeah.
That's crazy to try and keep all that together. But at the same time, it works. And for some people, they love games like that.
Sure. And I want to, just stop to clarify that there's nothing inherently wrong with one or the other. They're just options. You know, some people like those really grand, gallivanting, globe-trotting things, and you can mix and match them in your own campaign too.
Totally.
You can go from a local game to a bigger game. The Final Fantasy VII remake that's coming out.
Yeah.
It's making a lot of big news in video game circles right
Completely.
now. And that story actually is a great example of transitioning your scope. Because the whole first, well, I'm gonna say first disc, because I played it back when it originally came out 20 years ago.
I did as well
on the PlayStation 1.
I did too.
But it was a 4-disc set, and the entire first disc was in Midgard.
Yep, one place.
That's it, one little city, following that plot line, and then it transitioned to disc 2 when you finally got out of Midgard and like the world was your oyster.
Yeah. But again, it's a way to set scope, and games do it. Video games do it very well, because you're typically following one hero. You're not bouncing all over the place.
Well, and it cuts down on the coding to have to not make an entire world.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So let's talk about some pros and cons before we step into ways to do it.
Sure.
Pros. In my personal opinion, less books to use, less resources.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're starting out as a new storyteller, scope limit is one of the best things you can do for yourself.
No expansion stuff, no Unearthed Arcana, just player's handbook, deal with it.
Yep. You're still in the same world. Like everything's still the same.
Yep.
Sometimes you'll have balancing issues then because of that, because at least in some of the old versions of D&D, the balance was settled in other ways.
Yeah.
And you'd find that. You'd find like, oh, well, the Rangers kind of punked out in the main book, but if you use, the Ranger's Guide, it actually, his subclasses in that are better balanced for systems.
But at the same time, you would start running into issues. I know, and this was something that happened with like 3.5. I saw a lot of guides online. It was like how to become completely overpowered by level 15. Just take this class and then this subclass out of this book, and then multi-class with this class out of this book, and you get this ability with chains, with this ability with chains, with this ability, and you can do 3,000 damage in one turn.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, maybe limiting the book scope and saying that those aren't allowed is the best way of handling that.
But I think that also comes to players who are new to the system could look at, like, they looked up like, hey, maybe I'll be a ranger, and they look it up online and they're like, whoa, I need to know like 5 books and 16 powers and like multiple. They don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
You get one class to focus on. That's it. Simple as that. So character creation's faster, honestly.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. A lot less books on the table. And that's another thing too. I know it's kind of going by the wayside when you've got digital availability. Yeah. But at least back in the day, especially having the books available physically.
Yeah.
Like unless, your DM might have all of those things.
Right.
But you'd have to have a session 0, like character creation day, to go over and borrow their books because you don't have access. Like, you're not going to spend $150 to buy all these books just so you can create a character,
Yeah. And I mean, Urban Shadows has, in its base book, classes, but there's expansions to those classes. You can have additional ones. Sitting down sometimes and having, 9 jars of peanut butter to choose from, you're not going to be able to make a choice very quick.
Yeah.
But if you only got 3, you'll make a decision.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the best. I think that's one of the best things you can do for new players too, is cut down the choices to make it easier.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's, like getting into video games, that's one of the reasons why, I don't like procedural open world games. Like No Man's Sky. I'm sure it's a perfectly great game, but I don't like it because I ask, what do I do? Well, anything. Well, what can I do? Anything. Where can I go? Anywhere. Okay, what am I supposed to be doing? Anything you want. Give me a goal.
Super sandbox is sometimes too much.
Yeah.
So, all right, throw some cons at me.
All right, so you start knocking off options on the list. Some of your players might feel like their creativity is being stifled.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Especially if they had you started talking about the campaign to a bunch of friends. Because a lot of times, I'll do this where I'll be like, hey, I'm thinking about running this D&D game, or I'm thinking of running this 7th game, and I'm kind of going with this kind of angle. And you start getting an idea like, oh, I remember hearing about this class, and I want to try and run like this thing, And then I come out and be like, that's not one of the source books that I'm wanting to use. So yeah, you can definitely limit people that way and kind of crush hopes and dreams, if you will, in that sense. I think in that same degree, if you're talking about something and the first thing I say is in the case of 7th Sea, I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to do the whole game in Castillo. And you're like, but I want to play in Montaigne.
Well, find a reason for your Montaigne to be in Castillo.
We'll get to that. But
effectively,
yeah. I mean, that's what it comes down to. You're like, oh crap, they're at war. how am I going to make that work really well?
Well, it might take some wiggling, and it might create some interesting character opportunities for you, but
we'll get to that. I think that's coming up. We can talk more about that.
We'll get to that.
So what else?
All right. So might not be as interesting for certain, races, character types, classes, things like that. If you're limited,
I think that comes down to what they're thinking of the world. Like, I know that. Think about it this way: if I'm in Elder Scrolls, and the only place that I'm hanging out is Anvil, if I'm a Northern, if I'm a Nord, like, I may not really enjoy it. Like, in my own mind, like, I'm limited. Like, where am I going to go and hunt shit and become an awesome champion?
I mean, certain classes are built for certain things too. You know, again, getting back to the D&D thing, if you're playing like a rogue, you've got things like finding and removing traps and unlocking things. Well, if we're spending all of our times in the wilderness, okay, I mean,
just as much as I'm a paladin on a horse, I'm a cavalry paladin, and we're in a town.
Yep.
Like, when am I going to do mounted combat?
Right.
Like, my character's built around mounted combat so that I can eventually become a flying mounted combat dude.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's great. We're in dungeons. And we're under the city. And the whole campaign happens under the city.
Yep.
In the Underdark. Oh. Well, that's a limit.
Oh, I can't even bring my horse.
Right. Exactly. So.
And lastly, I think people don't like hearing no. I mean, it's kind of a big no-no in storytelling. Don't ever say no. Say yes and.
Right.
But when you set scopes, sometimes
the word no is in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll get to when yes can be a problem.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So let's talk about ways to limit scope. Like,
right.
what are different ways storytellers and people can limit scopes?
All right. So a few ideas off the top of our head. We've got limiting things to specific races or professions or geographical origin.
I think that's the easiest way to do it because then you don't necessarily have to limit everything. You could open up the class book if you limit region, or you can say, I'm really wanting people to be these professions for certain game types.
Yeah.
I think geographic location works well for urban shadows.
Yeah.
In that sense that you can set the city very small right off the bat and kind of go with that kind of a feel to it. I think that World of Darkness, Vampire, gets very globetrotty, and having things set in a single city still gives you the availability to...
Really? You think Vampire is very globetrotty?
I have been in more globetrotty Vampire games.
Wow.
I
don't think I've been in a single Vampire game that's like left its city and metro area.
Oh, dude, so many. Like, so many.
We traveled to the suburbs, man. We had a globe-trotting day today,
Dark Ages. Go into Dark Ages and run around Europe for like 2 months.
That's fair. I always played Contemporary.
And I say like 2 months in game.
Yeah.
So
I always played Masquerade. So.
See, there we go. So,
but keep in mind too that limiting scope by race is just as valid for you must be an elf, or just saying no dark elves in my game.
Yeah.
That's also a scope limit.
Yeah, totally.
You're removing something from the table to narrow down your list. And even if it's just removing one race because it's problematic from a storytelling standpoint, then...
Yeah, or setting world races like you did for Elder Scrolls. You're like, these are the races of the world. These are who you can play. Technically, mostly we fit into one of those races easily, but it wasn't like I could be a giant crystalline, entity.
Right. Well, put for instance, to use the D&D example, like Fearbolgs are in the, on the table as far as playable races and stuff like that. No, because there's no Fearbolg in Elder Scrolls.
Yeah.
And a couple races I had to tweak over and stuff like that. But
Tiefling and stuff like that.
You came down to those 9 races, period.
And I think that's perfectly fine. Likewise, you can leave those kind of things open and go with organization or bloodline or house or like ship crew and say, all of you are part of this. Like, you're all musketeers. Whether you are new, whether you've been in it for a number of years, whether you're getting close to retirement, you're all musketeers.
Now, this is the scope that I set in my game, too. You're all members of the Fighters Guild or the Mages Guild. I don't care what your character concept is.
Yep.
But you have to belong to the Fighters Guild or the Mages Guild, period.
And we ended up with nobles and peasants and all kinds of people.
Yeah, we ended up with people from foreign lands, people who were, domestic to Cyrodiil. I mean, it was a great eclectic. I think we got a great eclectic group out of it. But yeah, they're all mages and fighters.
Yep. And then you threw in this one, and it took me a second to really think about what you meant by it and go over it. But go ahead, kick it off.
Yeah, groups. With you're talking about the disparate pasts.
Yeah, because I had to think about what you meant by that.
So groups with disparate pasts, but a common goal to unite them.
Yeah.
Okay,
and it wasn't until you put down Shadowrun.
The job.
Yeah, it made sense. It was like they're in it for the money. That's literally Shadowrun in a nutshell.
Random, like if anybody's ever seen Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, perfect example of this group dynamic.
Yep.
Where you've all just been brought together for some reason. Now this can be because like Shadowrun, you don't know each other walking in. Some Johnson hires you, and you. This is the first time you've ever met, but your common goal and why you're a party now is because there's a job uniting you.
Yep. There's a common bond.
Or maybe a common villain.
Yeah.
A powerful lich has wandered across the countryside, laying waste to village after village and ruining lives and killing people and doing all sorts of dastardly deeds. Well, he's going to rack up some enemies along the way.
Yeah.
So maybe the scope of your campaign is, I don't care who you are or what you do or what race you play or even where you're from, because his swath of destruction is that big, but your goal is to kill this lich.
Yeah.
Or in some way avenge yourself upon him.
Yeah. There was one that I was following, which was that was a caravan that was moving across. It was a common caravan. Like, you all had to be part of this caravan. You know, whether you were guards, whether you were merchants who were in the caravan, whether you were, somebody just riding on it to get to the next location.
Yeah.
And you're all caught in a common problem. It's the train. You're all passengers on the train.
Yep.
And now it's the Orient Express, and there's been a murder.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. And that's a common, was it Who Killed Dr. Lucky?
Oh, it's just kill Dr. Lucky.
Dr. Lucky.
Yeah.
And it's those kind of things where you're all in a common place for a common reason, but not necessarily the same, And then the other one we figured out, which was the United Ideal, vigilante justice, making like a Justice League kind of a thing.
Yeah, or the other idea I came up with, I think, was maybe a druid and a ranger, some like outdoorsy minded people who might have come together to solve some sort of problem that was threatening nature or something like that. You don't know each other beforehand, but hey, here it is.
Yeah,
let's all get together.
Yeah. I mean, you also kind of, in the common goal kind of thing, if Princess Mononoke is kind of that same thing, where there's clearly something going on, and people from very different places come together to try and figure that out.
Oh, God, I'm so awful.
Ways.
I don't think I've ever seen Mononoke all the way through.
Really?
No, I know.
Oh, that's terrifying.
I know. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm looking at myself like that, with that furrowed brow going, dude.
Did I watch this whole movie?
What is wrong with you?
It's all right. So, one of the things that, how do you, as a storyteller, say that you've gone too far? How much control is too much control?
Yeah.
I know people who've gone to the point where here's your pre-gen character. And there are some systems that do that.
Sure.
Where, I think the Firefly system, when it first came out, was here's all the pre-gen characters. You're on a ship together. And it's pick your character. And it's whoa, that's a little too tight.
Right.
How do you
I had an idea.
enjoy that?
You inspired me with this vast universe you created, and now you're just handing me something that's
right. I think you can create some level of pre-gen, but I think you still you need some creativity there. The players need some level of creativeness to be able to tweak and adjust, in my personal opinion. So, but that's just me.
Well, I mean, you've done that before, though.
Yeah.
Hand us pre-gen characters and stuff like that. In fact, my 7th character started out that way.
Yeah, I did the Children of Heroes was a limitation that I did where I literally said you can pick any of these. And actually, I think I gave it to be all random. So I'd pre-generated character classes or not character classes, but
almost like
country origins.
Really filled out templates.
Yeah, it was a country of origin, and it was some skills, and then there was no name, no sex, no nothing else on it, and I had spent only so many points of the normal 100. I did 50 because you guys were kids. And I said, okay, you can put in this many additional points and let you guys run with it.
I think I got Madeline because I was the last one to the game. No, you guys have been playing for a little bit, and I remember I walked in. You're like, you had handed me 2 different character sheets, or 3 maybe.
Yeah, I think there were 2 or 3 left because Chris was the last one to pick in the main group, and he, of course, draws what he always draws.
Batman.
Yeah, he always draws Batman.
You can be anything you want in this game as long as it's Batman.
Yeah, he always does that. And I don't try for it; it just happens.
So I think to answer the question though, how much control is too much control? It's when people stop having fun.
Yeah, when they can't let creativity move them.
Yeah.
So how do we do that?
How do you solve that? Communication.
Do we ever talk about that?
I think we might have mentioned it in one show offhandedly that good communication is the key to keeping a good gaming group
20
going.
Episode 22, 21,
something like that. It might have been 21 times. In all of our
probably.
Look, seriously,
just
good communication.
Get that scope out there early, talk about it, have it before your session 0 so that they know what limitations you're setting up.
Yeah, before your session 0, when you're even floating the idea to your friends, like, hey guys, I'm thinking about running a D&D game where we're all bards or something, or whatever.
I want you all to be dwarves.
Yeah.
And see how much they like it. Like, because if that group is like, I'm not really interested. But if they're all like, yeah, that sounds pretty badass. Now you have a leg in.
Yeah.
Now you've started your limit scope and you can start moving from there.
Now, and again, worth mentioning, make sure that those books, if you are going to limit scope, like right from this point, are available to people.
Yeah. Like I would say in reverse, I would say these are the books you're allowed to use and slowly dole out the resources. And then for those people who are like, hey, I want to use this obscure thing over here, or did you hear about this obscure thing over there? Now you can make decisions on whether or not that's within your scope of deciding.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. And then if you're doing geographic limitations, make sure that comes out either right at the beginning of the session 0 or just prior to it so they have a little bit of time. And for God's sakes, leave blank space.
Oh God, and this is something I do not do nearly enough. I was mentioning this the other night too.
Yeah.
I can't stress enough, and this is me talking to myself because damn it, one of these days I'll take my own advice.
Yep.
Leave blank spots on the map because your players will fill it in with such great stuff.
Yep. They'll
fill in dramatic stuff. They'll fill in entertaining stuff. I keep coming back to the Surly Girl Scout. The Surly Girl Scout Inn. I jotted down in my notes there was like 2 or 3 major, inns that they could sleep in this major city in my game. And they decided like, nope, we're going to the bad part of town. And I was like, oh, okay. And they're like, and we're going to the Surly Girl Scout Inn.
Yep.
And for like a split second, I said, there's no Surly Girl Scout Inn. That's dumb. Stop that. It's not in my notes. Therefore, it doesn't exist. Let me dictate the world to you. And then that little voice in the back of my head said, you know what, Sarah? They're already into it. Roll with it and let them have some damn fun.
Why the hell not?
What does it matter if the Surly Girl Scout Inn exists?
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay. You guys want the crappiest inn you've ever stayed in? I will give you the crappiest inn you have ever stayed in.
It was beautiful.
And it was beautiful. You guys had a great time with it.
We did. And at the same time, it changed your mind and gave you a creative lead on the difference. It allowed you to create this beautiful dichotomy of scene for us waking up.
Where your nobleman was staying.
Yeah, versus us.
Versus you guys.
Yeah, and how quickly we changed location. But I think that's something you can easily do where if you're going to set a small scope, like you're going to say, hey, this is all going to happen in this region. And in fact, we're going to be starting in this town. Now, here at session 0, let's start naming places. So what's this? And you let people go around and like, Chris, what's this building here? Erica, name, who, what's the name of the harbor master? Because you know him. Your background, you were talking about like that you maybe for this one character which you haven't even decided on. What's the name of the bard who works at this inn?
Yeah,
who entertains here?
Rob, this tavern has something interesting hanging over its mantle of the fireplace.
Yep.
What is it?
Bugbear butt.
Yes.
Exactly. It's a giant bugbear butt. Why is it there? Because that was the only part he could get because the fire had consumed the rest of it. But he killed it, and therefore it's up there.
Yep.
Because guess where the fireball went? Right here.
Yeah.
And now there's a whole story that you didn't have to come up with. And again,
And
they're
your
not
players are invested because they came up with them.
That's right.
You know?
And that's kind of stuff can totally change the energy of a level of a zero session into an active group storytelling moment.
You know, and you get the chance to do these things when you limit the scope geographically. You know, and this is kind of bringing me back around to the Deep Space Nine example.
Yeah.
Is, you know, we knew who the tailor on that shop on the thing was.
Yeah.
The proverbial innkeeper, you know,
Yeah.
Quarks.
Yeah.
You know, we knew him, we knew his brother, we knew his family drama. Like,
Yeah.
when do you ever get to know the barkeep's family drama in any other, you know,
Yeah.
in any other show? Why?
Yep.
Because they're all busy gallivanting around with external stimuli, but
Right.
you've got, if you take the time to sit still and develop your current location, you're going to find all sorts of stories between the floorboards.
Yes, it is a legendary bugbear butt, and probably will now come up in multiple episodes since I've done that. Anywho, so yeah, let them fill it in, and then as far as player requests go, and I think this is the hardest part as a storyteller, it is a hard no is painful, but it does create scope creep.
Yeah.
So if you are going to stick because maybe you're a new storyteller and you haven't, maybe it's a new system. Like 5th edition is kind of new to me. So I set a hard limit when I was working on my campaign of what I was going to be willing to let people transfer from 4th to 5th with. And I said, you got to stay within these parameters for me.
3rd.
What was 3rd to 5th? Wow, how about that?
Yeah. We skipped a full edition.
This is what you've got to stay within parameters to remake your characters so that I could just have that limitation and not worry about looking in other books. Now, I used other guides for myself because I can do that as the storyteller, you know, to be able to help me. Like I went to other resources to get monsters and things to make it work.
Sure.
But again, my players, I knew their framing. I knew what they could do and what I could do.
Right. You didn't want to have as a new 5th edition storyteller, you didn't want to sit down and have one of those instances where you're like, okay, well, haha, I know exactly what the party's capable of, so
Right.
I'm going to throw this monster at them, and then they're like, oh, well, I just use this ability.
Yeah, and you're like,
what do you mean you have that? What do you mean you can do that?
Exactly.
Where's that in? You know, wizards can't do that. Oh, yeah, well, you know, I'm playing this subvariant, so
Yeah.
that's just a class ability
so I have
for me.
40 cantrips.
Yeah.
You know, and I can basically cast them at will, you know, whenever I need to.
Right.
You know, so, and then I think the other thing is that when a player, if you do know the system really well and you're setting your limitations in other ways, you have then the grace to be able to redirect or adjust or make some compromises depending on the system. You know, if you do have a vampire character who's like, I want to play a Lasombra, and you're like, that really isn't in scope. Well, what do you want to do? Well, I want someone who is unknown, who is different, you know, whose powers may kind of fit these types of things. Like, well, you want to be different and unknown. Ever thought about a Ravenos?
Right.
Because
right,
I think
right.
it would fit here. And you bring it in through that direction. And now it's something you know you're back on your own turf of being able to work with them and you can inspire and bring out something new that maybe they never even thought about.
Again, so it comes back to communication. Just work with your players. Oftentimes, you're going to be able to accommodate something in scope.
Yep, exactly. So,
And if your scope is tight enough that it is limiting those characters to the point where you can't come to a compromise, you might have tightened the reins too much.
you know, about that Reigns thing, I'm going to need you to get way off my back about that. Like all the way off my back.
Wow,
about that.
let me get off that thing then.
All right then.
All right.
So then as a player, how do you handle that?
First thing, work with your storyteller and just try to be understanding of why these certain scopes are set. Sometimes you set them for out of character reasons. Sometimes the storyteller, like you said, sometimes you're new to 5th edition. Yeah. You don't want any surprises coming out that aren't really like player's handbook sort of stuff.
Right.
So as you learn, you might broaden that scope, but for right now, keep it simple.
I think that's a great way of going.
But it might just be that you've got an idea. You've got a plan for where your story is going to go, how it's going to develop, or, certain things, certain challenges you're going to set out that are going to be important to people who fit into that scope. Like you mentioned, a group of dwarves. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, sure. If you've set your scope to a group of dwarves, it might just be important that you're all dwarves because the plot is going to be a dwarven plot.
Right.
And if I allow you to play an elf, your very first thing out of your mouth might be, why do I even care?
Exactly.
This is a dwarf problem.
Right.
That
doesn't make any sense.
So as a player, just try to be understanding when your storyteller sits down and says, this is the scope. It has to be either this geographic location, or you must pick one of these races, or we're only using these books.
Yeah. And I think that also then goes into the player side of like, okay, if all those things are true, that makes it very hard for me. If I had like, oh, my next 5th edition character, this is what I wanted to play. Like, this is the character type. I had these ideas and I was going to go this way because like I really wanted to play a gnome who was super lucky and basically was just a bumbling character who, the forgetful professor who just kind of stumbles through life, but somehow miraculously makes it through the whole thing. I can't really do that as a dwarf because they don't have all those class mods. I think at that point you need to say, like, if you're literally clueless on your character, maybe ask for ideas.
Yeah.
Spitball. Like, don't just come into session 0 with one idea that is completely outside of the realm of possibility.
And then when you can't have it,
you're upset and don't want to play now. Like, literally just take a step.
There's
back.
infinite possibility here. Maybe dig into it just a little.
Yeah. And I think just because you can't play a rule-based character that fits that, it doesn't mean you can't play the psychology or the demeanor, some hubris or flaws. Role play the character however you choose. Just do it a different direction within the game.
Yep, absolutely.
So
now the other thing too is, and we talked a little bit about scope creep and whatnot, don't ask for scope changes just because of your single good idea. Okay. Now we were talking about that whole, walking in with one idea thing and, trying to find ways to fit it within the scope. The other end of that is walking into that conversation and saying, well, I want you to make a special exception for me. And there's several problems with that. First off, it may be time to branch out, like we were talking. Just play something else. If it doesn't fit into the scope that the storyteller's laid out, don't make them change their scope to be able to fit your character concept. Just try to find something within the character concept, or play something different. But also, you start in with a sort of if you say yes to one person, you have to say yes to other people, and then having a scope is meaningless. Because if the very first thing you're going to do during session 0, during character creation, is break your scope,
right?
Why are you even bothering?
Exactly. I mean, and I'm not saying you're not compromising, but I'm saying if you're fracturing that far, you're going to feel like you're going to have to fracture more.
Right. So, I mean, take no as a player. Take no for an answer. It's okay. It's okay. Everyone's going to have fun. Yeah, I guarantee it.
Yeah. And again, back to what we were saying before. As a storyteller, allow for those vacancies so that your players can have that.
Yeah,
have that availability to say, "Hey, I want to be able to add into the story these pieces so that I feel like I'm part of it."
Sure,
I think that's a great win. All right, we actually get time for questions.
We do.
We have good time for questions.
Oh my goodness!
And there are some questions in here that were for today. I think that worked really, really well. But one of the ones that I want to hit, because we were just talking about scope creep, was actually from my wife. And that was, how do you prevent scope creep when players make unexpected turns?
Okay.
I think that's a good one. So I'm going to throw one at you. You're going to love it. Let's say you say yes to a mage being added into your vampire game.
Okay.
They say they're going to be part of the town. There's no problem with that. They're fitting in as far as everyone else. In fact, they kind of have a sire who might be, okay with vampires and shit like that. And then suddenly they open a portal to Ireland.
Do not like.
That's scope creep right there.
That's extremely scope creep right there. Yeah. So, I mean, first off, you yes and it.
I would agree.
Because you really don't. I mean, I'm still, as much as we just talked about telling players no. I'm still very against, in the course of gameplay, telling people, well, no, you can't do that. Like, if our city is set, if our game is set in Chicago, and just Chicago,
right?
Like, that doesn't make it impossible to open a portal to Ireland.
Yeah,
it just means that I haven't written anything for it.
Right.
So you roll with it at the time, and then you have a conversation with that character afterwards of like, where are we going with this?
Yeah, and
I'm not asking to say like you can't do it. Like, I'm not interrogating you. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
I want to be able to follow this group anywhere they want to go. But I want to make sure that it's not just you who wants to skip out to Ireland.
Right.
Because if you do, We'll make you a new character, and your character will now be an NPC who lives in Ireland. We'll still have ties to the group.
Sure.
But the story is not there. The story is in Chicago. So you can go if you want, but boom, you lose your character, make a new one.
Yeah, for me, I would say you're talking about a session end there.
Yeah.
You know, if everybody decides they're going to walk through and go to Ireland, maybe they leave the scene to go to Ireland. Like they're in the middle of something, some crap's going down. They're like, let's get the heck out of here. And they're in Ireland now. You're like, and session. You're like, okay, well, what happens in Ireland? You'll find out next week.
2 hours early. Great, let's go to the bar. You know?
And my thought is this: is like, okay, the next session, it's been 2 months, or you reopen the portal back home. Well, what happened in Ireland? I don't know what happened in Ireland. You tell me.
We'll go around the table.
Yep.
We'll name one thing that happened in Ireland, and then you, and then you. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, this is the way we're going to do it. You tell me what happened to her in Ireland.
Oh.
And she tells what happened in Ireland, and then you tell him what happened in Ireland, and then you tell me why he opened the portal to go back home.
Yeah.
You know, and that's it. You know, nothing's game changing. Everybody's affecting the other players, and you move right back into plot. And sure, some time has changed. Things have changed in the cityscape. You know, whatever was going on at that time is now gone. You know, maybe they come back to a bunch of, barricades up and like 2 cops sitting in a car stunned because suddenly there's a portal opening where there was one 2 weeks ago, and like the CDC put up barricades because they thought some crazy event had occurred there.
Yeah.
And boom, now they're back.
Now, okay, there's actually there's a great comment in the live chat right now from my one and truly, Heatsink, it's my boyfriend Sean, says player advancement can change / break scope.
It totally can.
And I think it's a great comment, actually.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I mean, scope is not something I think that's necessarily hard set. No. I mean, even Deep Space Nine, which I touted as this pinnacle of reduced scope, still had episodes where they got in the Defiant and they just went to the Alpha Quadrant and fought
something.
The Dominion on
war.
on in their own foreign planets and stuff like that. They still had globetrotting adventures.
Yeah,
and there were still reasons for that and stuff like that.
Right.
Nothing is saying that if your campaign evolves.
Yeah.
If characters grow out of the scope, that your scope might not change.
Or the campaign's view of scope may change.
Yeah.
For instance, now one of the characters has a background, like in the case of 7th Sea, that has them going to find something because they want to get in with the secret society. The Explorers Guild, which is not really secret. And they're like, okay, well, we need you to go on this adventure. And they're like, okay. And so they get a boat and they go.
Yeah.
So now they're on the sea. But again, scope is limited. You're still keeping it to just that.
Yeah. I mean, even in my own game, you guys just found a dragon priest and a dragon.
Yeah, I know.
That you did not know were there,
Nope.
and were in Cyrodiil of all places, which are not really known for their dragon priests nor their dragons. So there's some questions to be asked there. But
Indeed.
we've got a Nord in the group who is very hot about the lore behind those dragons and dragon priests. So I mean, if next game he opened it up by going, I want to go to Skyrim now.
Yeah.
And I want to fight these people because there's got to be more. Let us know in the live chat. Are you still hearing us? Or did we just drop out? Because we might have a minor technical issue.
Still showing us recording, but my whole computer froze.
Yeah, we heard it. So, in any case,
so yeah, your scopes can change. Absolutely.
I totally agree. If your scope does change and it's something that shifts and you move on, just take a breath, move in that direction, and do a yes and. But again, if you need to keep in scope, keep communicating with your people about that, and do it directionally if you can.
No, okay, we're good. Live chat is telling us that we went out for a second, but we're back.
All right. So let's hit another question up then.
All right. So let's see here, Samantha. I always like answering questions from her because she's a new storyteller. So I like seeing what insights she adds here.
Okay.
Where can you go to find a group to play with?
Oh, Lord.
Inspired by 7th Sea because I want to play, but I don't know how to find a group. This could be a Skype-in sort of group?
You can always do that kind of a thing.
Sure.
You had some really good resources, I want to say, in one of our earliest episodes where we kind of went over remote gaming and searching for people.
Yeah. So I know that There's some online gaming communities, like Roll20. I know specifically one.
That was the one I was
I'm
thinking of, yeah.
sure there are more, but
Yeah.
I don't know them off the top of my head.
Yep.
But Roll20 has like literally you create kind of a
Profile?
forum post, I
Oh,
suppose,
yeah.
for your game.
Yeah.
And you can actually put the call out for like looking for 4 players and even give qualifications to those, set whatever times you're going to be playing and whatnot so that players can make their own informed decisions on whether or not they'll be able to even participate in your game.
Yep.
And then, you all kind of meet online. There's some voice and I believe video option as well, if that's your thing. And then, of course, the storyteller has full control over things like mapping tools and dice rollers and even character sheets and stuff like that. That's all built in. So you can run your entire game online with people you've never met before. I've played in them. I would say they're definitely not as good as face-to-face. But, hey, any port in a storm,
Yeah, and I think like things like Reddit is another totally valid option. I think there's a lot of people who go ahead and jump on that and will either post or reply to people as they find posts that have people asking for things. I think that's not a bad way to go.
Overwatch is posting in the live chat, reddit.com/r/LFG.
Yep.
Stands for looking for group.
Yep, and that's pretty much it. But there's also like D&D. There's specific D&D Reddit threads. There's 7C ones. So you can definitely find a bunch of different direct threads through Reddit, which will get you to what you're looking for.
The other place that I would suggest is going to your FLGS, your friendly local game store, and a lot of times they may be hosting, especially if they have like dedicated game spaces. Like I know RAW near us does. And there's a couple other game stores in the area too that have kind of like back rooms for like playing Magic the Gathering, D&D, whatever you want to bring there. And you may be able to find either an Adventurers League game of D&D going on there, or even just like-minded individuals who also want to play D&D that you may be able to meet, get to know, and possibly find someone who's, wanting to get in the game. And of course, the last and probably best place is bug your friends. Bug them mercilessly.
Yeah. You'd be amazed how many people will play a game if you talk about it enough and you're excited about it.
Yeah.
And if they don't want to play, then they're clearly not your friends. You should probably dump them all.
Exactly. They can dance if you want to.
That's right. So, all right, let's hit another one. I thought I saw another one in here. Matt Elf had asked, what systems in your experience are most supportive for controlling the scope of the game? There are some that just straight up have scope design right into them. Urban Shadows is a good example of that.
Yeah.
I think Mouse Guard is a good scope designed game because, again, it's more about the role playing and world building as a group. But I think pretty much any of the games that tend to have a straight up world setting, where there's a basic world and then you can add supplements to it.
I know Shadowrun's probably grown a lot since the last time I played it, but like it was always set in Seattle.
Yeah,
Period.
Yeah.
Shadowrun takes place in Seattle. Oh, here's your Chicago book.
Yeah, here's your Bug City. Here's your here's all the other ones. But I think any of those you can fit that direction. I think some of the larger games like GURPS, where it's just a system, you don't really have a world to set to, I think can make it a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, I think that's probably it. I think it really comes down to the world books.
Yeah.
The better world books, I think the better your scope geographically is going to be.
Yeah.
GURPS, I think, is a phenomenal example of a game that's just whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope that kind of helps a little bit.
But I don't know that there's a game that's best for limiting scope. Just simply because any game you can limit the scope to if you just say only this or only that.
Okay.
Period.
Okay. Who do you want to hit next?
Let's grab Draven.
Okay.
I don't hear from him terribly often.
No.
I think my question would just be, how do you keep encounters interesting in a system where I think most enemies are other humans? Coming from a fantasy background, I'm always hesitant to use the same enemy type multiple times.
In my personal opinion, I don't think people even really notice enemies so much as they notice the interaction.
Yeah.
Like, you could be fighting goblins, and unless you're doing a lot of goblin sounds and a lot of goblin things, they're just fighting something. Like, and I think in systems like 7th Sea specifically, where you're basically fighting brutes all the time, they are a kind of mindless mob.
Yeah.
And it's more about how you decorate the scene, whether they are sailors, whether they are, guards, whether they are, the king's personal guard, whether they are mercenaries. Those are all different types of thugs. Really, the system just helps you iron out the simplicity of what they are. But whether or not you're fighting a specific monster or a different monster, I think comes down to why. That's really what makes it interesting. Yeah, a DayZ kind of game where you're basically just fighting, undead again and again and again and again is boring. But if that's the flavor of the story, and that's not actually what the story is, the meat and potatoes of the story is about how you're surviving, then yeah, it's just background.
Yeah.
I mean, a 7th Sea story is not about the brutes and combat situations related to those brutes, nor is it about all of the nameless people at the party. It's about the villain. It's about finishing things. It's about completing a story or discovering the mystery. That's the real point to get to the end of the story.
Yeah, and like even in more like a Dungeons and Dragons sort of sense, I mean, most of my enemies are humans right now too, because you guys are fighting organized bandits. And I think the compelling thing about the story is not that you're fighting bandits, but why you're fighting, when you're fighting, what interesting things those bandits have organized around.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got several different gangs, and each gang kind of has its own thing.
Yeah.
So you've got some variety there because humans are varied. Humans have variety.
Yeah.
You exploit that.
Yeah. I mean, they can think around things.
Human doesn't just mean guy with sword.
Right.
Human can mean a lot of things like, wet works, black ops, tactical ranger squad, hiding, ambushing you on a bridge.
Likewise, it could be tired guard 72 hours into his shift, who just wants to go home but is on high alert and is sipping on a cup of coffee at his guard post. Like that's a thing.
Infinite variety.
That's right.
So
that's right.
Yeah, just think about the motivations and make the situations interesting. So
squeeze another one in here.
Yeah, let's go back to the Mad Elf because he asked a bajillion questions.
Kind of did.
We don't hear from him for like a while. He's super quiet,
and then he lays it out
and
like
then just
kitchen
like
tile.
4 questions all at once.
Yeah.
All right. So, what's your favorite module / pre-made dungeon and why? I got to be honest. I don't have a lot of experience with like pre-made modules and dungeons and stuff like that.
I played a lot when I was younger and early D&D. I don't remember all the names of them because I just played them. Like the storyteller never told us where we were. Like, you are now entering the Tomb of Horrors. Like, it was never part of it. But I remember even just talking with Overwatch over the years about someone's like, oh yeah, I did play that one. I mean, I never finished it, but I remember those things about it. I think as a storyteller, I personally love Robotech's Ghost Ship.
Oh yeah, I remember you telling me about
Yeah.
this. You were like, so you ran this as a one shot.
Yeah, I ran
for,
it as
for
a
some
one
friends,
shot.
didn't you?
Yeah, and it's really simple. I mean,
Yeah.
it's basically a derelict ship, Zentradi's ship that's just floating in an asteroid belt that was discovered. And
You guys go check it out,
Ships
and-
have been mysteriously losing, radar signature around them. Now that a second group has gone missing, they want to know what's going on. So they send out a force to go check it out, and
Hijinks ensue.
and it did.
Yeah.
And there are so many ways you can play that, and there's so many ways it can end. And it's just, and you can learn things about a future story that can be put into it. So it's just a neat little module with some very basic parameters that if you discover these things, great. If you don't, great. It's a mission start to finish. Go find out what's going on. And then once you discover a certain thing that's going on, they ask you to assist. And then once you go beyond that layer, you get to do something else. So it's a progressive mission, if you will.
Sure.
So
Oh, it sounds great.
yeah, it's fun. And just like any other good module, it layers upon itself its own story, but leaves you a lot of options to change things and adjust as the story goes on.
So I'm gonna real quick address something that just came up in the live chat. Knox says something make Batman, but blah blah blah, and I haven't even read the rest of it. Look, Overwatch is in the live chat with you right now. Never start a sentence with make Batman because he takes that as a dare.
Yeah, it's gonna happen. I'm sure he's working on it right now and we just can't see it.
He absolutely is. He's got 7 different versions of them. But okay, so I remember what my favorite module is.
Oh, okay.
All right. And believe it or not, it's also a Palladium module.
Oh, how funny that.
Yeah. And now I know you all were trying to be clever with your question there, Mad Elf, trying to slip another turtle reference into the thing. But I'm gonna head you off at the pass because this one comes out of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangenesses book.
Hey.
It is one of the little modules. It's just in the back of the book, just a little adventure you can run called Terror on Rural Route 5.
Oh my God, I remember that.
Yes.
That was fantastic.
Terror on Rural Route 5. And I want to say why the reason this has a special place in my heart is because it was the first game I ever storytelled.
Really?
I think I was like 12 or 13.
Oh, that's adorable.
I got a couple of my friends together, and like Palladium was the only thing we had because that was my first gaming system. It's what I knew.
It was huge. It was huge, especially around here.
And so, I got a couple of my friends into it, and we played that, and I ran Terror on Rural Route 5 for them.
That's
I
awesome.
probably did a horrible job of it, but
whatever.
It's fond memories.
Yeah,
Fond memories.
I can remember a number of games that I ran horribly.
Yeah,
but I still run games horribly, just not as horribly.
It was just about this little group of mutants, mutant farm animals.
Oh,
and one like furred. And there was a couple like mutant pig and mutant bull and I think a couple mutant sheep or something like that. And they had like weapons and they took some school kids hostage because they were, I don't know, ticked off about something. I don't even remember now.
Sure.
But yeah, and your job was to resolve the situation.
Somehow.
Okay. So we had some fun times with that. So
Good times.
And
we have one more?
cheers resound in the live chat.
Yeah,
we absolutely have time for one more. You want to grab Technolich?
I mean, it's a big question, but I think we can squeeze it in for the last few minutes. What are some tips on dealing with the emotional baggage that comes with ending a campaign?
Oh, that's something you think about all that often is the emotional baggage that comes, like, because there's some separation, like you've got to have some closure there.
Yeah, I've thought about it quite a few times.
All right, well, what'd you come to?
Nothing good. Like, players love nobody likes closing things up. Pardon me. But, like, it's even worse when you're coming to the end of a campaign and as a storyteller, you want to move on to something else. Like, whether it's another system, whether it's another story. Trying to figure out how to close something is a daunting task.
Oh, it is.
Writing the end of a novel, writing the end of the book, feeling like there's an end to something. 7th Sea kind of gives you the ability to do the wrap-up scenes, which is always that this isn't the end, this is the beginning of another story for somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been able to do those kinds of things on occasion.
Sure.
But it is hard. It is hard as a storyteller to say goodbye to certain aspects of things.
Yeah.
And I think as a player, it's exceptionally hard to put a character down because you never forget them. They're never really gone. They're living in Valhalla, drinking, with all the other characters you have. There's a great Sony commercial that has these, I think it's World War II guys walking into a bar. And they come up and they put their guns down next to like spears and axes and laser swords because it says no weapons allowed. And then they walk in and it's a bar full of characters.
Oh, geez.
And they're all talking about someone who helped them through a tough situation. And then it shows the picture on the wall and it's just a face shot of a kid and it's to Michael.
Yeah.
They all toast to Michael. That's how I think of characters from RPGs that we run at our tables, sitting around in some distant pub talking about their stories. Yeah. Just as much as we talk about them. So.
Let's see here. I would say probably my biggest thing is just give closure.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are going to end a campaign, whether you end it story-wise or whether you need to just wrap it up for whatever reason, prior to the story actually coming to an end, I would say, have a breakdown session with your characters or with your players and just let them know, like, okay, let's figure out how this thing rolled out and kind of have an end credits.
Yeah.
What happened to who bit characters and stuff like that. This person lived happily ever after. This person got what they were coming, what was coming to them, things like that.
Sounds good.
Just give him closure.
So next week, we're going to talk about scale, macro and micro, and mass combat, ship-to-ship, siege, all that kind of stuff. How it fits in.
You ever wanted to fight a kaiju? We're going to talk about it.
You can find us on Twitter at st_conclave, on Instagram, st_conclave. Our Discord link is in our Twitter every week in our description there, and you can join us on Discord and talk with us there.
I want to give a big shout out to all of our Patreon members who support the show week after week, month after month, especially Knox in the Box and Sam. We love you. Thank you so much for your contributions and helping us do what we do. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find him on geefrogmusic.weebly.com. And our outro music, which you're hearing now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Mid-Air Machine. You can find her on freemusicarchive.org and also soundcloud.com/midairmachine.
We record at Podcast Detroit. You can find them at podcastdetroit.com, on Twitter at Podcast Detroit. Our lovely engineer is Caitlin, and we appreciate all that she does for us every single episode. But we mostly we'd like to thank our families, both Sarah and Sean,
Vicky and Sean.
Vicky for me. God, I'm just stumbling tonight.
We're all over the place.
And our friends who make our games wonderful and give us these wonderful times to talk about things and so many more topics. And you, our listeners.
We love you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.